They say knowledge is power. But for many intelligent people, it feels more like exile. You understand more, see deeper patterns, ask questions others avoid, and somehow that leaves you feeling alone. Isn't that strange? The more you understand the world, the more alien it feels. The sharper your perception, the harder it is to fit in. Why does intelligence, something we claim to admire, so often result in social isolation? Why does thinking deeply feel like a punishment in a world built for surface-level noise? Nietzsche saw it. He wrote of the lonely philosopher, walking ahead of the crowd, unable to return. Jung warned of the dangers of individuation, becoming fully yourself in a society that rewards conformity. Dostoevsky gave us characters too self-aware to live comfortably. These thinkers weren't celebrating suffering, they were diagnosing a quiet epidemic. The loneliness of seeing too much in a world that doesn't want to look. In this video, we ask, why do the ones who think deeply often feel like strangers among their own kind? And what does that tell us about society and about ourselves? Nietzsche and the burden of seeing too clearly, approximately 1,000 words. It's a strange thing, intelligence. Everyone says they want it. Parents hope for smart kids, employers praise critical thinkers, society puts genius on a pedestal. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more clearly you see the world, the harder it becomes to feel at home in it. This wasn't just a complaint Nietzsche made, it was a warning. Nietzsche saw the world not as it pretended to be, but as it actually was, full of contradictions, illusions, hollow values, and borrowed beliefs. He believed that most people, most of the time, live under comforting fictions. They believe in truths handed to them by tradition, religion, culture. These truths provide structure, certainty, meaning. But for the one who thinks deeply, who asks too many questions, those truths begin to crack. And when they do, so does the sense of belonging that came with them. Nietzsche called this the experience of the free spirit, someone who breaks away from the herd and dares to think for themselves. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? But it's not. Not really. Because the first step of breaking away from illusions isn't liberation, it's loss. You stop believing what others believe. You stop participating in the social games everyone seems so invested in. You find yourself standing on the outside looking in, and no one's waving back. He described the truly intelligent individual as a kind of exile, not because they were rejected, but because they could no longer return. Once you've unmasked the world, it's impossible to keep playing pretend. You can't go back to blind belief, even if you want to. And so you carry your knowledge like a burden, not because you're bitter, but because you're awake. In his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche gives us the image of the overman, an evolved, awakened individual who creates their own values. But before you get to the overman, you have to pass through the camel, who bears the weight of tradition, then the lion, who says no to it all, and finally, the child, who creates something new. It's a brilliant metaphor, but most people never make it past the lion stage. They reject the herd, but they haven't yet built something to replace it. That's where many intelligent people find themselves. Stuck between rejection and reinvention, aware of what doesn't work, but still searching for what could. This in-between state is deeply alienating. You see through societal rituals, shallow ambitions, performative morality. You see people arguing about nonsense, chasing things that won't satisfy them, fearing ideas that might free them. And the more clearly you see it, the less you know how to interact with it. Not because you don't care, but because you do, in a way that most people have stopped allowing themselves to. And here's the cruel twist. Society rarely thanks you for seeing clearly. In fact, it often punishes you. The deeper your insights, the more uncomfortable you make others. The more you question, the more you're seen as difficult, negative, or even dangerous. Because when you ask, why are we doing this, you're threatening the foundations everyone else is standing on. Nietzsche called these people the last men, comfortable, uncurious, unbothered. They live for safety, for routine, for distraction. They don't want to be awakened, they want to be entertained. And when someone comes along with real insight, with uncomfortable clarity, they don't listen, they laugh. Or they turn away. This rejection creates a kind of double alienation. First, you're isolated by what you see, then you're isolated again for daring to say it out loud. So what does the intelligent person do? Many learn to stay quiet, to speak only in fragments, to translate their insights into socially acceptable language, to be useful but not disruptive, to play along while dying a little inside, but some walk alone. Nietzsche himself was no stranger to loneliness. His writing is filled with pain, distance, and a deep yearning for connection that was never quite fulfilled. He walked the mountains, thought in solitude, wrote for readers who wouldn't exist until long after his death. He understood that intelligence wasn't just thinking differently, it was feeling differently. And that feeling of being awake in a world that prefers sleep can be profoundly isolating. And yet, Nietzsche didn't fall into despair. He embraced the loneliness of the thinker not as a curse, but as a calling. He believed that to live truthfully, you might have to live differently. That alienation wasn't a flaw of intelligence, it was its consequence, and maybe even its proof. Because if the world feels confusing, shallow, or absurd to you, maybe that's not your failure. Maybe that's your perception working exactly as it should. But what do you do with that perception? Nietzsche's answer was bold. You create. You don't retreat into cynicism. You don't spend your life criticizing what's wrong. You build new values, new ways of being, new language for people like you, people who see too much to play dumb. You stop trying to belong and start trying to become. It won't make you popular, it won't make you rich, but it might make you free. And that, for Nietzsche, was worth more than any applause. So if you've ever felt like your thoughts are too heavy for small talk, like your vision makes others uncomfortable, like your intelligence feels more like exile than privilege, know that you're not broken. You're just ahead of the curve. You're not lost. You're just walking alone, on purpose. Carl Jung in The Cost of Individuation, approx. 1,000 words. Carl Jung didn't believe that life was about becoming perfect. He believed it was about becoming whole. But here's the uncomfortable part. Wholeness, as Jung saw it, doesn't mean becoming what society wants. It means becoming who you really are. And that process, it's not glamorous. It's not trending on Instagram. It's messy, isolating, sometimes terrifying. He called it individuation, the slow, inward journey of separating yourself from the collective noise to find the person underneath the roles, the masks, the inherited expectations. Sounds noble, right? But try explaining to your coworkers that you're spending less time networking and more time integrating your shadow. Try telling your family that your ambition lately isn't career advancement, but confronting the unconscious. You'll get blank stares, maybe worried ones. That's the cost of individuation. It doesn't just challenge your sense of self, it challenges your place in the world. It makes you strange in a society that loves predictability. And if you happen to be intelligent, analytical, introspective, curious, you're probably more susceptible to this path than most. Because once you start asking questions that go deeper than what do you do for a living, the surface-level social world starts to feel insufficient. For Jung, the mind wasn't a neat filing cabinet. It was a vast, haunted mansion, full of archetypes, shadows, and symbols whispering truths we'd rather not hear. Individuation means opening the doors you've spent years keeping locked. And when you do, you start to realize something unsettling. Much of who you thought you were was constructed by your parents, your culture, your education, your social circle. Not maliciously, just unconsciously. So the journey begins. You start peeling back the layers, the high achiever persona, the people pleaser, the overthinker, the rebel, the rationalist, and underneath all of it, a self you barely recognize. A self that doesn't care about your resume, a self that doesn't want to win arguments, it wants to understand. A self that doesn't want applause, it wants truth. But truth, Jung warns, doesn't always come with belonging. Because the more individuated you become, the more connected to your true nature, the more disconnected you may feel from everyone else. Not because you hate them, but because you're not playing the same game anymore. While others chase external validation, you're chasing internal integration. While they polish their image, you're wrestling your inner demons. While they stay busy to avoid discomfort, you sit in silence to face yours. And that makes you a bit inconvenient. You don't quite fit into dinner parties. You don't play along with groupthink. You question too much. You feel too much. You're too much, and yet somehow not enough for the roles you're expected to fill. This is the paradox of individuation. You become more yourself than ever before. and that self often doesn't fit into the life you built before you knew who you really were. Jung didn't sugarcoat this. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned that many people avoid this path because of what it costs. Not just comfort, not just status, but sometimes relationships, sometimes identity. Sometimes the illusion of certainty that makes life bearable. He even went so far as to say that individuation can lead to neurosis if the rest of the world doesn't meet you where you are. In other words, becoming real can make you feel crazy if the world around you insists on staying fake. And here's where it gets especially hard for intelligent people. Because you don't just feel this, you understand it. You see the pattern, you know the why. But that doesn't stop the ache. Insight doesn't cancel out alienation. It just makes it more articulate. You don't just feel different. You can explain why you feel different. And that somehow makes it worse. You become a translator between worlds. One part of you still speaks the language of the collective. The other part is off in the wilderness, trying to make sense of the symbols, dreams, and deep inner movements that most people have no vocabulary for. You want to come back and share what you've learned, but most people don't want to hear it. They're still living in the surface version of reality. And your truth sounds like nonsense. Or worse, like arrogance. So you stay quiet, or you find a small group of others, fellow wanderers, fellow seekers, and exchange half-coded phrases of recognition. But often you keep going alone, because individuation isn't a group activity, it's personal. And the further you go, the less you can be who the world once expected you to be. But Jung wasn't pessimistic. He didn't see alienation as the end of the story. He saw it as a rite of passage. The exile is necessary, but not permanent. You walk into the woods not to escape the world, but to re-enter it more whole, more conscious, more human. And when you return, not with answers, but with presence, you bring back something society desperately needs: integrity. Because here's the thing. The world is full of people playing roles, smiling on cue, saying what they're supposed to say, buying what they're told will make them happy. But deep down, there's a hunger, a quiet ache for something real, something meaningful. And those who walk the path of individuation, lonely as it may be, become guides, not gurus, not experts, just people who've dared to face themselves and made it back. So if your intelligence has made you strange, if your self-awareness has made you lonely, if your inner life has pulled you away from the collective, don't rush to fix it. Don't force yourself back into the mold. Jung would say, keep going. The pain isn't the problem, it's the path. You're not breaking down, you're breaking through. Dostoevsky and the Overconscious Man, approx. 1,000 words. Imagine being so aware of every motive, every emotion, every tiny contradiction in yourself and others that you can no longer act naturally. Every smile feels artificial. Every compliment sounds rehearsed. Every social norm becomes a performance you can't unsee. That's the condition Fyodor Dostoevsky captured so uncomfortably well in Notes from Underground, the condition of the overconscious man. He's not a hero. He's not enlightened. He's just aware, painfully so. So much that even existing feels like a kind of awkward parody. He can't go back to innocence, but he also can't find peace in the modern world. And in many ways, he is a haunting mirror of what happens when intelligence and emotional depth collide with a society that prizes simplicity, productivity, and agreeable surface-level behavior. The underground man is constantly watching himself. Every thought is dissected, every instinct second-guessed. He feels everything too deeply, analyzes everything too thoroughly, and ends up paralyzed. Not because he doesn't know what to do, but because he knows too much to pretend he doesn't. This is the burden of hyper-awareness. You don't get to just go with the flow. You see the flow. You see the falseness in it. You see the hypocrisy in small talk, the insecurity behind confidence, the manipulation in social rules. You see yourself lying just to be polite, and then you see yourself seeing it, and it becomes unbearable. Dostoevsky wasn't romanticizing this condition. He didn't say it made you smarter or better. He said it made you invisible. Because the overconscious mind doesn't fit neatly into polite society. It questions things others treat as sacred. It points out truths no one wants to hear. It sees the absurdity of life, but has no tools to escape it. And so, it collapses in on itself. For the intelligent and emotionally sensitive, This kind of inner conflict is all too familiar. You're not just thinking about the conversation, you're thinking about the dynamics, the subtext, the social context, the unconscious motives behind what's being said. While others respond instinctively, you're running simulations. And while they move on, you're stuck analyzing what just happened for the rest of the day. It's not a choice, it's just how your mind works. But it comes at a cost. Because society doesn't reward people who overthink. It rewards people who act, who perform confidently, who sell ideas simply. And the more complex your thinking becomes, the harder it is to squeeze it into a tweet, a slogan, a soundbite. You hesitate, you reflect, you offer nuance, and in a culture obsessed with speed, that makes you invisible. The underground man is full of contradictions, and that's the point. He wants to connect, but he despises the shallow terms on which connection is offered. He wants to be seen, but hates the performance it requires. He wants to be free, but is imprisoned by his own self-awareness. And so he suffers in silence, not because no one cares, but because no one understands what he's even suffering from. Dostoevsky's insight was brutal. The more conscious you are, the more alienated you become. Not because the world is evil, but because it's simple. And when you are no longer simple, when your thoughts spin in dimensions others can't see or won't tolerate, you become a ghost. A thinking ghost in a world of doing. There's something darkly comic about it. You sit in a room watching people argue passionately about things you know don't matter. You smile, nod, engage, while your inner monologue runs laps around the conversation. You long for someone who gets it, someone who can match your depth without flinching, but most people are afraid of that kind of depth. They confuse it with sadness, or arrogance, or madness. And maybe they're right to be afraid, because real depth, real awareness, changes you. It makes you less efficient, less marketable, less socially smooth. You stop being fun at parties, not because you're depressing, but because small talk feels like trying to breathe through a straw. But Dostoevsky doesn't leave us in despair. His overconscious man isn't just tragic, he's also honest, and in a strange way his suffering is proof of his humanity. He feels too much because he sees too much. And while that can be isolating, it's also real. It's the kind of suffering that suggests you're still alive beneath the armor, still searching for truth in a world that prefers performance. Society's rejection of uncomfortable minds, approx 1,000 words. Society loves the idea of intelligence, as long as it behaves itself. Be clever, but not inconvenient. Be insightful, but not disruptive. Think deeply, but don't challenge anything too sacred. Intelligence in theory is applauded, but real intelligence, the kind that questions assumptions, that notices the cracks in the system, that asks uncomfortable whys when everyone else is content with how, that kind tends to make people nervous. And when people get nervous, they push you to the margins. It's not that society hates intelligent people, it's that it prefers them edited, smoothed out, made marketable. You can be smart as long as you're useful, as long as your thoughts produce results, as long as your insights help the machine run smoother, not reveal that the machine might be broken. But the moment your intelligence begins to question the foundation, why we work the way we do, why we believe what we believe, why certain systems exist at all, you become a problem. You stop being bright, you start being difficult. People smile less when you speak, invitations slow down, you feel the chill of social distance, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stepped outside the script. This isn't personal, it's structural. Systems protect themselves. Cultures rely on consensus. Norms depend on repetition. So when someone shows up with a question that doesn't have a neat answer, or a perspective that isn't easily digested, the system doesn't know what to do. And rather than adapt, it pushes back. Not always with force, usually with something subtler: silence, awkwardness, polite dismissal. This is the rejection that intelligent, sensitive people often feel but rarely name. It's not dramatic, it's not always cruel, but it's persistent. You say something meaningful, and the conversation skips past it. You raise a moral concern, and people change the subject. You point out a contradiction, and suddenly you're too intense. After a while you learn, not to speak less, but to edit yourself. To keep your real thoughts tucked away, saved for the few who can handle them, or no one at all. It's a strange thing. You have so much to give: depth, clarity, perspective, but the world seems built for ease, not depth. It wants quick takes, not deep truths. Smiles, not sincerity. Agreement, not challenge. So your mind becomes a secret you carry, a weight and a gift, a source of strength and separation. Nietzsche knew this. He wrote that the most profound thinkers are often those who suffer in silence. Not because they're wrong, but because they're early. Society rarely understands its visionaries in real time. Jung saw it too. He said that the wise person feels more alone, not less, because they see what others cannot or will not see. And Dostoevsky's overconscious man, he's not rejected because he's unpleasant. He's rejected because he's too honest in a world addicted to illusions. So what does society do with uncomfortable minds? It tolerates them when they're dead. We quote them, we celebrate their legacy, we build statues. But while they're alive, we often treat them with suspicion. Too serious, too radical, too abstract, too emotional, too much. The rejection isn't always visible, but it's there, in the lack of invitations, the missed connections, the fading eye contact. But perhaps the most damaging part of this rejection is what it teaches the mind itself: to shrink, to apologize for its depth, to translate everything into digestible sound bites, to doubt its own clarity. After enough pushback, many intelligent people begin to silence themselves. Not because they've changed their minds, but because they've learned that being understood often means being diluted. And that's where the real loss happens, not just to the individual, but to the collective. Because the uncomfortable minds are the ones that move us forward. They see what the rest of us are blind to. They feel what we've numbed. They name what we're too polite to confront. And in rejecting them, we don't just isolate people, we stall progress. Of course, not all intelligent people are alienated. Some learn to adapt, to use their minds strategically, to climb the ladder without revealing what they really think. They speak in coded language. They give the system what it wants while quietly holding on to their private insights, and they succeed, but often at a cost: authenticity. They learn to survive by becoming palatable, by hiding their edge, by offering brilliance in bite-sized, non-threatening doses. Others refuse to play that game. They withdraw, they go quiet. They create from the margins, they live simply, they think deeply, they become hermits in spirit even if they live in the city. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much to compromise. So what's the answer? Should intelligent people isolate themselves completely? Should they water down their truth for acceptance? Jung would say no. He'd say the goal isn't to be accepted, it's to be whole. To live with integrity, even if that means walking alone. Nietzsche would agree. Become who you are, he wrote, not become what the world rewards. And maybe that's the quiet revolution: to remain uncomfortable in a comfortable world, to stay sensitive in a culture of performance, to think freely in systems that prize obedience. It won't make you the most popular person in the room, but it might make you the most real. And realness, unlike charm, doesn't fade, it deepens. Intelligence and the longing for meaning approximates 1,000 words. Being intelligent doesn't just mean solving problems faster. It means sensing that something is missing, even when everything seems fine. You see the gaps between what people say and what they mean. You notice when systems are efficient but soulless. You ask, sometimes without wanting to, what's the point of all this? In a world that's busy measuring everything except meaning. That's the quiet burden of intelligence. The deeper the mind, the deeper the hunger for purpose. You don't just want comfort, you want coherence. You don't just want answers, you want understanding. And not just theoretical, existential. You want to know what your life is for, what society is doing, what it all means. But here's the problem. Modern society isn't built to answer those questions. It's built to keep moving, faster, smoother, more efficiently. It teaches you how to function, how to earn, how to perform. But it rarely teaches you how to live. It doesn't ask who you are, it asks what you can do. It doesn't ask what's meaningful, it asks what's productive. For many intelligent people, that disconnect becomes unbearable. You sit in classrooms memorizing facts, wondering why no one is talking about death, love, despair, wonder, anything real. You work a job that pays well, but feels hollow. You go to parties and smile, but your mind keeps drifting. Is this it? Is this what adulthood is supposed to be? Everyone else seems content with shallow rituals, scrolling, spending, repeating, and you're stuck asking questions that don't have clean answers. You're not depressed. You're awake. But awake people in a sleepwalking culture often feel like aliens. You crave conversation that doesn't feel like a performance. You crave beauty that isn't branded. You crave community, but one that doesn't require self-betrayal. You want meaning, not just metrics. But meaning can't be bought, downloaded, or scheduled. It emerges slowly, painfully from living with depth. And depth isn't in high demand these days. Jung spoke about the modern soul being sick, not because we lack technology or comfort, but because we lack meaning. Dostoevsky's characters constantly teeter on the edge of meaninglessness, searching for something, anything, that makes suffering worthwhile. Nietzsche declared that when traditional values collapse, we must become creators of meaning, not consumers of it. They all knew. The problem isn't that modern people suffer, it's that they suffer without knowing why. And that why matters, because when you understand your pain, you can endure it. When you give shape to your longings, you can work with them. But when you're surrounded by a culture that tells you, just distract yourself, just be grateful, or worse, just hustle harder, you feel insane for feeling empty. So you hide it. You smile, you function, you move through the world carrying a question no one wants to hear. It's not that intelligent people are superior. It's that they are sensitive to patterns, emotional, philosophical, cultural. They feel the hollowness beneath the surface, and they can't just unfeel it. They're not content playing the game when they can see the rules are arbitrary. They long for something real, something rooted, something sacred, even if they don't believe in God. And that longing, if ignored, turns into despair. But if faced, if honored, it can become a source of strength, a compass, a kind of spiritual architecture. Because while modern life teaches us to numb our questions, intelligent people, whether they want to or not, carry them. The key then isn't to silence the longing for meaning, it's to stop expecting easy answers. Meaning isn't found, it's built, in small moments, honest connections, creative acts, quiet rebellions. It's not given by society, it's crafted from your refusal to settle for less. And once you accept that, the alienation becomes easier to bear. You stop waiting for the world to reflect your depth. You stop hoping someone else will hand you a purpose that fits. You start building something from within, even if no one else understands it. Yes, that path is harder. It's lonelier. It requires sitting with silence, uncertainty, and doubt. But it also leads somewhere real. Not flashy, not profitable, but true. And in a world addicted to artificiality, that's revolutionary. So if you've ever wondered why you feel out of place, why success feels hollow, why crowds feel lonely, why meaning feels elusive, it's not because you're broken. It's because your mind is still looking for something this culture forgot how to offer. Keep looking, because that longing isn't a flaw, it's your soul trying to speak. If you've ever felt like the room is too loud, the conversation too shallow, the world too fast, you're not broken, you're just awake. And yes, that can be lonely, but it's not a failure, it's a signal, a sign that you are perceiving something real in a world trained to ignore it. Nietzsche, Jung, and Dostoevsky didn't offer easy answers, but they showed us that alienation isn't madness. It's the price of seeing clearly. And maybe, just maybe, it's the beginning of something better. A deeper life, a richer self, a quiet community of those who feel the same. You may walk alone for a while, but that doesn't mean you're lost. It might mean you're ahead of the crowd. If this video resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's felt the same quiet disconnection. Leave a comment. When have you felt most alone in your thinking? And what gave you strength to keep going? Subscribe for more explorations of philosophy, psychology, and the struggle to stay fully human in a society built for surface-level thinking. Because maybe you're not the only one who feels this way. And maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think.